Turkey is making final preparations for troops to cross the border into northern Syria. The Kurdish administration there has called on civilians to defend their territory. People are being urged by the Kurdish forces to head to the border to resist the planned offensive, which Turkey has said is imminent. Well, this all follows President Trump's controversial decision to withdraw US troops from the area. To give you more of a picture here, the area is controlled by the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, who of course played a leading role in the fight against the self-styled Islamic State, but they're regarded as terrorists by Turkey. Turkey says it wants to set up a 30-kilometre safe zone along the border to resettle up to 2 million Syrian refugees who are currently living in Turkey. While our correspondent Orla Girin is at the Turkey-Syria border, she gave us this update.
Well, there is a real sense here now that the offensive will begin very soon. We have had statements from senior Turkish officials, both from the President's press spokesman and also from one of his aides, saying officially that they are ready, that it could come any time. Turkey describes this as an operation to create a safe zone, as you mentioned. It says the aim is to provide a buffer to ensure Turkish security and also to allow for the return of about 2 million Syrian refugees. Now, Turkish officials are describing this as eliminating what they call a terrorist threat, dismantling a long-standing threat to Turkey's security. And they're claiming that this operation will combat Islamic State. Well, the response from the other side of the border behind me, from the Syrian forces, the Syrian Kurdish forces, who are the target of this attack, is that in fact it will do the opposite. The Syrian Kurdish fighters have been crucial in battling IS in recent years. They say they have lost 11,000 fighters in doing so. They have managed to push IS from a very large swathe of territory. Of course, they did that with the support of the US, but the message from Washington now is you're on your own. So yes, as you mention, the Kurdish forces have been appealing to civilians in their area. They have put out a call for a general mobilization over the next 3 days, and they are urging all civilians to come to areas behind this border and to gather in those areas as a kind of a human shield. There's no specific time frame, but we do expect significant military action to be happening soon, perhaps later today or more probably tomorrow morning. Certainly military analysts are saying that a likely starting point might be dawn tomorrow, that we could see, for example, in the first stages, some very heavy artillery being used, airstrikes being carried out, and then possibly after that, manpower going across the border in large mechanised columns. But the Turks have said very clearly this will be an assault from the air and from the land. And from their point of view, it's really not a sudden operation. They have been talking about this, calling for this, planning for this indeed, for a long time. And a senior US administration official admitted the other night that Donald Trump had basically had to accept the inevitable. He said that the US president had been trying to dissuade Turkey over the past 2 years and had failed to do so. So certainly there is a conviction here that this is coming, and already we're seeing diplomatic chaos and concerns about the possible humanitarian cost and a great deal of concern, I would say, in the international community.
Well, I'm joined now by President Erdogan's special advisor and spokesman, Ibrahim Kalin, from the capital, Ankara. Thank you so much for being with us here on BBC World News. We understand you have been speaking to the National Security Advisor in Washington as well. I wonder if you'd bring us up to date.
Well, we had a phone call last night about the safe zone, and we discussed our aims and the process that will follow now. The aim of the safe zone, which our president has raised, by the way, with a number of world leaders over the last 2-3 years, including President Obama when he was in office, Chancellor Merkel and others. The goal is to clear and secure our border along Syria by eliminating all the terrorist elements from that border. And the second one is to create space for the refugees to return to safely and voluntarily. And we do this within the framework of the UN Security Council Resolution 2254, and we fully support and respect Syria's territorial integrity and political unity. Turkey has no intention in occupying any part of Syria. When we fought against Daesh 2 years ago in the Jarablus area, we entered that area, we eliminated more than 3,000 Daesh fighters there, and when we finished the operation, we returned that part of Syria back to local residents. It's been run by the local Syrians themselves. We did the same in Afrin last year. We cleared that area from PKK, PYD, YPG terrorists and returned the Afrin area back to the local people again. As you know, we are also present in Idlib as part of the Astana process, where we are securing the Idlib area. We have about 12 military posts there, and we are making sure that about 3 million people that are right now in the Idlib area remain safe. At the same time, we fight against any terrorist elements.
Can I ask you for more detail on you say that it's very important. Can I just ask you say it's very important to eliminate Daesh, the self-styled Islamic State. You're referring to the battle, the fight that's been had. Now, I just want to remind you of what Nikki Haley in the US has been saying. Obviously, key in the administration formally, she said the Kurds were instrumental in our successful fight against ISIS in Syria. Leaving them to die is a big mistake. It is clear, isn't it, that Kurdish fighters were instrumental in the fight against IS, which you have just highlighted as being of such importance.
Well, we have no problem with the Kurds, whether in Syria, in Turkey, in Iraq, or other parts of the Middle East. We are fighting against a terrorist network. The fact that PYD, YPG has become a primary force against Daesh in Syria is due to the fact that the Obama administration decided to support them with immense military equipment, ammunition, weapons, training, money, and political support. If they had decided to work with another group, legitimate group in Syria, like the Syrian Arab Free Syrian Army, Syrian National Council, Turkoman, and many others in Syria, they will have been the most effective force against Daesh. You cannot fight one terrorist organization with another one. Everybody knows that PYD, YPG is PKK in Syria, and PKK is listed as a terrorist organization in Europe, in the United States, and other parts of the world. The PKK's ultimate goal in Syria is to create a state of their own. And we cannot let that happen vis-à-vis Syria's territorial integrity, but also since it's a terrorist organization that's been fighting against us for the last 35 years, we cannot let PKK or any other terrorist network to have some kind of a state structure right at our border. Our fight is against the terrorists, not against the Kurds. There are thousands of Kurds in Syria who do not subscribe to PYD's, YPG's Marxist-Leninist ideology. It's really an irony of history.
So can I just get some clarity on what you're saying for our viewers here? Just are you talking about potentially an all-out assault on the YPG? You have distinguished between Kurds in general and Kurdish forces that you regard as terrorist. So are you signalling that an all-out assault on the YPG is something you will see as a necessary part of this incursion?
Well, what we have communicated to the Americans, to Europeans, and others is that we will establish this safe zone by our own means. We do not foresee or want to have any confrontation with anybody there, so they better pull out of this area. And that's exactly what President Trump decided after the phone call with our president last Sunday. And that is the case at the moment. I just had a phone call with the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, and we went over this again. Our record is very clear on this. When we entered Jarablus and Afrin, we've taken extreme care in terms of making sure that no civilians are attacked, no civilian infrastructures are affected. And you can go and look back at our record there and compare to what happened in Raqqa, compared to what happened in Mosul or in Aleppo, you know, by different countries, by different operations. Our record is very clear. We've been very, very careful about this, and we will do so. In regards to the Kurds versus PYD, etc., and some U.S. Yeah.
If I could pick up on what you've just said, they'd better get out. It is also a fact that Kurdish fighters have been holding thousands of former IS fighters as prisoners. And President Trump is among many to say, well, if Turkey crosses the border, if there's a military incursion, you will then have responsibility for those IS fighters. Is that something with which you agree?
Well, first of all, let me underline that our goal to establish a safe zone will in no way diminish the fight against Daesh. We fought against Daesh in Jarablus. We've arrested more than 5,000 and extradited or expelled more than 8,000 Daesh-related people, eliminated 3,000 of them in the Jarablus area, and we will make sure that Daesh does not come back in any form or shape, whether in Syria or in Iraq or somewhere else. In regards to the prisoners, sorry?
How will you ensure that?
As we did in Jarablus, in Afrin and other places, and as we are doing in the Idlib area as well. As I said, we've done more for the Syrian people and the Syrian refugees for their safety and security than any other country. We're hosting about 4 million Syrian refugees, and we have prevented them from Daesh attacks in Turkey as well as in the Syrian territories. So this fight will continue. It will not diminish in any way the fight against Daesh, and we will, of course, as part of the international coalition against Daesh, continue to coordinate our efforts with the other forces, the other countries in the US, Europeans, Arab countries, Russia, Iran, and others, because Daesh is the common enemy, and we fought against them. We will continue to fight against them. In regards to the Daesh or ISIS prisoners held by PYD-YPG, in fact, the root cause of the problem there, the specific problem with this group of people is that the countries of origin do not want to take them back. I think President Trump was right when he complained about this, that the Americans with PYD-YPG have been holding them in different parts of Syria in the east of Euphrates for the last 2-3 years, and such countries as Germany, France, Italy, UK, and Belgium and others do not want to take them back, but they're their own citizens. They shall take them, they shall try them, and follow the due judicial process. In the meantime, of course, we will make sure that they are not let loose, they are not released, they do not pose any threat to anybody, to Syrians themselves, to us, to Americans, or others. We are working on a plan, again, with our allies and with the local people there, with the Free Syrian Army and local tribes and others, to make sure that they do not pose any threat to anybody.
Ibrahim Kalin, you have just delivered a very clear message to the rest of the world about the responsibility and, as you see it, the international responsibility for these fighters. Could I also remind you of a message that was sent to you from Donald Trump, which seemed to perhaps threaten the Turkish economy? Mr. Trump has tweeted, as I've stated strongly before, if Turkey does anything that I, in my great and unmatched wisdom, consider to be off limits, I will totally destroy and obliterate the economy of Turkey. How do you receive a message like that?
After making this decision, President Trump has come under a lot of pressure. So it's really part of internal American politics. Let's remember, he said he would like to pull out of Syria completely about 8 months ago. He announced this after lengthy discussions with the president. But then his military and security bureaucracy and establishment actually refused to follow his orders. Then we had an agreement on the Manbij roadmap, where Manbij will be evacuated by PYD-YPG elements. It didn't happen. Now, for the third time, he's saying that he's not pulling out completely out of Syria, by the way. He is just pulling American soldiers out of the area that we will turn into safe zone along the Turkish-Syrian border. And now he's standing his ground. For that, he's getting a lot of pressure.
Do you agree? Donald Trump has just tweeted in the last 2 minutes. We've heard this from Donald Trump. He said that the United States going into the Middle East was the worst decision ever. Is he right?
Well, he has his own views about this issue. At the UN address, he said that the future belongs not to globalists, but to patriots. So he has a different understanding of how world politics should function and where the American power fits in that structure. It's a wonderful intellectual discussion with huge political consequences, obviously. But I guess his primary goal is to make sure that Syria remains safe for everyone, no terrorist activities, and the American soldiers go back home. So we respect that.
And to that end, the president is saying he's ready to. He's saying he's ready to. Sorry, I think it's the delay on the line. But to that end, and the protection of Syria, Mr. Trump is saying he's ready to totally destroy the economy of Turkey. You're an ally.
Well, yes, we are ally, exactly. And I think, again, he is referring to the domestic political pressure he is getting, because he's now accused of betraying the so-called Kurdish forces. And when I see some people referring to PYD-YPG as America's ally, I'm like, wow, you know, there is really a failure of communication or terminology here. We thought we are the ally of the United States and NATO, and as two countries, we have strategic partnership. For the U.S. to pick up a terrorist network in Syria that wants to divide Syria, wants to create its own state, which has committed war crimes. If you read the reports by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, they were published about a couple of years ago. In fact, they said that what PYD-YPG did in some of the Arab towns in like Ras Al Ain and Tel Abyad and other places may amount, in fact, to war crimes. And by the way, the PYD-YPG has also kidnapped Christian children. The very small Christian community in the east of Euphrates has issued statements about this, asked for our help, also to save their children. They have raised villages to the ground. They've done all these things, but nobody wants to report it because it goes against the narrative
those who speak for Kurdish political forces say they see an attempt by Turkey to try to eradicate them, and that back and forth is clear. I wanted to give you an opportunity, as you've spoken about domestic pressures on the White House, to tell us a little bit about the domestic pressures for you in terms of your need to repatriate, your desire to repatriate some of the several million who fled from Syria. Where do you want to send them back? And if they're not from the secure zone originally, how will you help to resettle them?
We have about 4 million refugees from Syria in Turkey at the moment. Our president had what he called a policy of open gates, open door, and we have opened not only our doors but also our hearts, not just the government but the people, NGOs, municipalities, and everybody has embraced the Syrians because they fled a war, they fled barrel bombs, they fled unspeakable violence and massacres. So we are hosting them and we will continue to help them as much as we can. But the refugee problem is not only Turkey's problem, it's an international crisis. In recent history, we've not really had this kind of a huge problem as the Syrian refugee crisis. But if you look at the powerful countries of the world, how much they have contributed to this. For much of Europe, the Syrian file is just about not letting the Syrian refugees come to Europe. And that's really so unfair. Thousands of people have died in the cold waters of the Mediterranean and the Aegean, and all they care about is to make sure that they go somewhere else, rather than addressing the issue at its root. We are trying our best to help them by hosting them here, by helping them, by providing aid, but also into Syria. In fact, we are hosting 4 million refugees in Turkey, but also we are helping about 3 million other internally displaced people on the Syrian side. So basically we're taking care of about 7 million, that's about 1/3 of entire Syrian population. So we want to create conditions for them to go back to where they've come from, to their own towns and villages. We're not going to force anybody to go anywhere they don't want to go. And we're not interested in changing the demographics in the east of Euphrates or any part of Syria. In fact, it was PYD-YPG that changed the demographics by occupying Arab villages and towns, in fact, by forcing other Kurds who do not subscribe to PKK's ideology. Some of them fled to Turkey, some had to go somewhere else inside Syria. So we want to correct it and make sure that they go back to their own villages and towns and cities voluntarily and safely.
Ibrahim Kalin, spokesman for President Erdogan, thank you for joining us here on BBC World News.